This video was brought to you by Incogni. Demographics have always played a big role in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israeli politicians have spent much of the last 50 years worrying about the fact that Israel's Arab population was growing faster than its Jewish population. And former PLO chairman Yasser Arafat once even said, "The womb of the Arab woman is my strongest weapon." While Arab and Jewish fertility rates have converged recently, two other demographic trends, namely high fertility rates among Israel's ultra-Orthodox community and then within Gaza, have also exacerbated Israel-Palestine tensions and might plausibly have contributed to the recent crisis. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at these three fertility patterns, how they might have contributed to the Israel-Gaza crisis, and what might happen next. Now, the first thing to say is that in discussing fertility in this context, we're not intending to provide a complete explanation or absolve anyone. We're not saying that the events we saw over the weekend are solely a consequence of fertility patterns, or that these patterns absolve Hamas of responsibility. And conversely, we're not saying that Israeli policy is solely a reaction to fertility patterns, or that these patterns absolve Israel. Instead, we're merely trying to show how different fertility rates might have causally contributed to the wider Israel-Gaza crisis. Anyway, disclaimers aside, we think there are basically three ways that fertility patterns have contributed to the Israeli-Gaza crisis. First, the fact that Arabs have historically had a higher birth rate than Israelis has made Israeli politicians reluctant to accept a fully democratic binational state. Second, the fact that ultra-Orthodox Jews, or Haredim, have a higher birth rate than secular ones has pushed Israeli politics to the right. Third, the fact that Gaza specifically has such a high fertility rate has helped foster extremist attitudes in the territory, in part by exacerbating pre-existing economic woes. So let's start with the first one. Essentially, while the Arab and Jewish birth rates in Israel have converged recently, Arabs used to have a fertility rate roughly double that of Jews, and estimates suggest that Arabs now outnumber Jews in Israel and the occupied territories combined. In the past, Palestinian politicians have been explicit about the perceived political advantages of higher Arab fertility rates, and a Palestinian diplomat even told the UN in 2019 that Palestine would, quote, accelerate their reproduction machines if Trump pushed ahead with his so-called peace plan, which ceded a significant amount of Palestine's pre-1967 land back to Israel. Anyway, this created two challenges for Israel's political class. First, there was a security challenge because even with superior military technology, Israeli politicians worried that Israel could be overwhelmed by a larger Palestinian population. Second, it made Israel's political class wary of what's sometimes called the one-state solution because they worried that Jews would be outvoted by Arabs in a full democracy. For context, until recently, the most popular solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict was to split it into two separate states. But the so-called two-state solution has essentially been scuppered by the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Any plausible two-state solution would require at least some of this territory to return to Palestine, which would in turn require the Israeli government to evict the 500,000 or so settlers currently living in the West Bank. Given that Israel had serious trouble evicting 8,000 settlers from Gaza in 2005, and there are another 200,000 in East Jerusalem, this just isn't going to happen, which means the only other solution, in inverted commas, is a single binational state with both Arabs and Jews. This became apparent in the 2010s, and in 2016, then Vice President Joe Biden expressed his, quote, overwhelming frustration with Israel's expansionist settler policy, warning that Netanyahu was pushing Israel towards what Biden termed a one-state reality. While Israeli leaders were never keen on the one-state solution for obvious reasons, they're even less keen on it now that Arabs would be able to outvote Israeli Jews. Essentially, Arabs' historically high fertility rate has created a political deadlock in Israel, which was always going to explode at some point. On to the second relevant fertility pattern, the high Haredi fertility rate. Essentially, the Haredim, which means those who tremble before God, are an ultra-Orthodox Jewish minority who were decimated by the Nazis and originally made up just a tiny minority of Israel's population. The expectation was that they would either fade away or be assimilated into Israel's secular majority, but instead, their remarkably high fertility rate of over 7 children per woman caused the Haredi population to grow rapidly, and they now account for about 14% of Israel's population. While the Haredi fertility rate has since fallen to about 6.5, that's still much higher than that of other Israeli women, and if current trends continue, Haredi will account for something like 25% of Israel's population by 2040. Now, the Haredim have been a politically important constituency in Israel for a while now because the Knesset's relatively low vote threshold of 3.25% means Haredi parties reliably end up in Israel's parliament and often in its government, but perhaps the most direct effect Haredim have had on Israeli politics recently is via their support for right-wing Israeli nationalists like Itamar Ben-Gvir. While Haredim actually used to be pretty left-wing, their pro-settlement sentiments have made them natural allies to Ben-Gvir and other right-wing Israeli nationalists. For context, Haredim account for 30% of all West Bank settlers, and the two largest Israeli settlements, Modin Ilit and Beitar Ilit, are both Haredi. Anyway, support from especially young Haredim helped launch Ben-Gvir from a fringe politician to a government minister in just a couple of years, and he and his ultra-nationalist allies have been able to drag Netanyahu's coalition to the right on a whole load of issues, including stepping up support for settlers in the West Bank. Unsurprisingly, these policies have strained Israel-Palestine relations, and 2023 was on course to be the bloodiest year in the region for decades, even before the recent violence. Finally, the third relevant fertility pattern is the remarkably high birth rate in Gaza itself. While it's fallen a bit in recent years, Gaza used to have literally the highest fertility rate in the world, despite being essentially a war zone. This makes Gaza more violence-prone for a couple of reasons. First, Gaza's fertility rate peaked at about 8 in the 1990s, which means that Gaza today has a lot of young men. Political demographers have long identified a relationship between the population composition and rates of political violence, with the fraction of 15 to 30-year-olds in a state's population positively correlating with its risk of political violence. Second, this means Gaza has a lot of children, and this puts strain on the Gaza economy by increasing the dependency ratio, i.e. the number of children and old people, dependents, relative to the working age population. According to CIA data, Gaza now has a dependency ratio of nearly 0.74, the highest in the world outside of Africa and Afghanistan. Obviously, the main economic problem facing Gaza is the fact that it's, well, blockaded, but a high dependency ratio doesn't help, and Gaza's economic woes, including a ridiculously high poverty and unemployment rate, only fuel its political unrest.
A couple of years ago, I was the victim of identity theft, and I only found out when I got a court letter saying that I owed money to a broadband company at an address I'd never lived at. And I'm not alone here either, with victims of data breaches rising by 41.5% in 2022. Now, all of that stolen data is very often being added to commercial databases, with data brokers potentially aggregating your personal information, including your name and aliases, social security number, login credentials, home address, location history, online activity, and more. All of which is available for purchase by businesses and could fall into the hands of criminals too. Fortunately though, Incogni are here to help. That's because Incogni reach out to data brokers on your behalf, request your data's removal, and deal with any objections. Plus, as brokers often continue to collect data even after takedown requests, Incogni continue to keep watch. So whenever a new record pops up on a data broker site, Incogni will automatically take care of that too. And even if you're not worried about your data being stolen, we all deal with endless junk mail and robocallers, both issues that Incogni's services could help cut down. So create an account using our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, by using our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks for checking them out, using our link, and thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video.